Attention all international medical students and graduates. Are you looking to improve your residency competitiveness and achieve your dream program match? Look no further. Introducing the 2023 IMG Roadmap course, the online program that will boost your personal and professional growth. This comprehensive course offers live cohort-based coaching from a seasoned expert, me, along with personalized feedback, templates, and even demos. You'll leave with a solid understanding of your personalized IMG journey and the skills you need to enhance it. You'll ditch the overwhelm, and the best part, you can learn at your own pace from anywhere in the world. Whether you're a first-year medical student or a graduate seeking concise, practical coaching to improve your CV, this is the perfect investment for a successful career in the US. The IMG Roadmap is here. Be the first to know when the doors open in April of 2023. Sign up right now at drninaloom.com/waitlist. Again, that's drninaloom.com/waitlist. The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap podcast. Today I have Dr. Ada with me. I don't know why I just said Ada. It's Dr. Ada with me. And she'll tell us her last name and she'll give us the details around that. But I'm really excited to have her on. She's not an IMG, but she's someone that I believe has a very important story that many of you want to know, many of you want to hear about. She is a pediatrician currently in the Chicagoland area. And I'm so excited to have her on board today because she could tell us what it takes to be that non-US person that goes to a US medical school. I know that's a little bit off kilter for some of you. You're thinking, well, this is an IMG podcast. But in some ways, there are some similarities and things that you can learn, especially for those of you that are starting out in the process, maybe on an F1 visa, or you're in the States right now and you're looking to go to medical school, or maybe even outside of the United States, whatever that case is for you. I know that you'll benefit from her story. So let's welcome on. Welcome, Doc. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks, Nina. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so proud of you and what you're doing with this, helping so many people. And I know we've talked about me coming on for a while. I'm so glad to be here today. So my full name is Dr. Adannia Enyioha. I'm married now, so my last name is Adejero, but I left it as my maiden name. You had said I was in Chicago. I'm no longer in Chicago. I actually did my residency in Chicago, so now I'm based in the Philadelphia area. So a little backstory about me. I am Nigerian. I came to the United States when I was 16 on an F1 visa. That's an international student visa to do college. So I did my college in New York City. I was a double major in biology and economics with a focus on pre-medicine because I wanted to go to medical school. Interesting story. When you're an international student, you're very, very familiar with the international student office at every step of your journey. And I remember the international student director at the time had said, this medicine you want to do, in the 20 years of me being here, I don't think I've seen any international student get into medical school. So, it may be wise for you to pick up another major that this school is good for. So I went to Fordham in New York, and Fordham was really good for economics and finance, and its law school is also well known. And so that's the main reason I did a double major in economics. So during the course of the time when I was in medical school as an international student, as an F1 student, I think some of the most trying periods of my life was trying to get into medical school at the time. When I was in college, I didn't really have a lot of people that I knew who had successfully gotten into medical school, but I knew one person. And sometimes that's all you need, right? So you know that one person and you learn from them, you ask questions, you learn from their mistakes, learn from their strengths, and you just keep it moving. So at the time, let me not date myself, but I graduated in 2002. I graduated from college in 2008. So it's been a while now, but at the time I only knew one person, and he was actually another international student like me who had gone to the same high school I went to in Nigeria. So he had gotten into a program in Chicago, and he was just a first-year student. But at the time, there were a bunch of us that wanted to go to medical school, and we were reaching out to him, and we formed like a little group. We would, talk to each other about preparing for MCAT and things like that. But what helped me when I was in college, get into medical school, was kind of aligning myself with organizations that assisted minority students. So a big one for me at the time was SNMA. So I'm sure a lot of people know SNMA as international students. So they kind of helped me with resources because I was a Nigerian student, pretty young, and we're all still learning the system at the time. And they assisted me with not only some financial assistance to study for the MCAT and take some MCAT classes, but they also kind of like helped those of us that were really serious about trying to get into medical school. They helped us kind of give us a timeline of what we needed to do at the certain time of the year, kind of building up to taking our exams and interviewing. So now fast forward to when I was trying to get into medical school, I'm probably applied to 60 something places. Also, that's very expensive, but with that was being able to do that was because I started early to talk to people about my passion and my plans. And I was able to get some funding and some assistance from some of these organizations I was in. So as an international F1 student, they don't even want to see you. And when they see that, even they see that you need any kind of sponsorship, it's almost like a immediate, maybe they take your application off. So from the 60 something applications I sent in, I got one interview. So this is me, a new kid in New York. I've spent 4 years. My hopes and dreams were to go to medical school, and I got one interview after the 60 something. But to be honest, all you need is one interview, right? So I had one interview. I had one chance to prove myself. And at the time, I also had applied to Caribbean schools. So I applied to Ross. I remember Ross at the time. And I applied to the other one that's in Grenada, I think. Those schools, their interviews were in New Jersey. I easily went over there. As soon as they saw me, saw all my grades and everything, they were happy to give me an admission there and then, because a lot of those schools, the admission were rolling admission. But I had heard that, that may not be the best way to go for me. If I could eventually get into a school in America, it would serve me better in the end. So I tried my best. The school I interviewed at was in Minnesota. I had never been to Minnesota. I didn't know anything about Minnesota, but I was up for the challenge because that was what was going to take me to my ultimate goal. So I went to Minnesota. The interview went really, really well. The lady that I spoke to, we had a very good conversation. So not everyone is good with interviews in general, but I don't mind talking to people, telling them about my passions, where I'm from, my goals, things like that. And she was a very good conversation. It was a very good conversation with her. But as life would have it, I was still waitlisted on that school, right? So it wasn't like an automatic get in. I was still waitlisted. And luckily for me, before the end of the summer, I got my admission and I didn't have to go to I had one chance, and that one chance served me right. So I know your podcast is more about people getting into residency, which I'm going to talk about. But I think it's important for people to hear this part of the story because there were so many people. I mean, I had, family friends who I had never met, but when I came to America, I heard about them who were doctors, and they would tell my parents or my friends things like, don't even waste your time. Our own kids are American students, American citizens, and they're trying to get into school and it's impossible, things like that. So I always tell people, like what is meant for you will happen for you, and just keep being open to tell people what your interests are, what your passions are, what you're trying to achieve, because you don't know who's going to help you kind of like have that tip or have that resource or that connection to get you to where you want to go. Luckily, when I decided to go to Minnesota, my dad was like, oh, one of my friends lives in Minnesota. So he kind of took me to my interview and was able to help me that way. And eventually when I went to Minnesota, those people became my guardians, right? So I think for a lot of people that are trying to get into medical school as international students here, you can't shy away from being part of organizations, talking to people, having mentors, just kind of putting yourself out there. I remember doing that a lot when I was in medical school. And I think that really helped me to kind of focus and finally land that interview. I don't want to talk too much about different things, but that's kind of like the first interesting spot that kind of got me into the medical realm as an international student. Yeah.
So, wow, that's a pretty impressive story, because that one university waitlisted you and then later on, did they admit you, or how did that work out?
Yeah. So what it is, when you're on a wait list as a student, I think wait lists happen differently at different schools. But this wait list, it was kind of like a rolling wait list. So when you're told you're on the wait list, you have a number. And so they said, I remember this vividly, like every day around like, let's say noon, you have to call, and then it's like an automated like number movement. So you'll say, okay, today your number. When I started on the wait list, I was like number 11. And the wait list, let's say, is closed by like sometime in June. And they tell you this maybe 2 months ahead. So you're calling every day, but someone is going to be number one when the wait list is full. So I used to call every day. And then luckily that was how they're like, okay, you're no longer number one, you're off the wait list. And that was kind of how I got into the program.
Wow. Yeah, that would be anxiety provoking to say the least, right? Like
for sure.
Calling. I'm sure today would be more of an online thing, but back in the day, having to call, it's like, yeah, that would be nerve-wracking.
I feel so dated for that. But yeah, we have to call.
We both are, because I took USMLE when it was still a score. When it was still not a score, 3-digit? No, 2-digit. When it was a percentile. Remember, right? Had you done USMLE? When did you do USMLE? Was it a 3-digit number or a percentile scoring?
So the steps, I think they were still digits.
Yeah. So we both date ourselves. So that's great.
I don't know what's going on these days, but yeah, things.
I know. I was like thinking about it. Yeah. I took the USMLE when it was a 2 digits, and then it became a 3-digit score, and now it's going to pass fail. So I guess we're living through the times.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, so you did all of this on an F1 visa. Did you have to complete medical school entirely? And was there any period where you weren't in school between college, not medical school, between college and medical school? How did you transition? Like, did you just keep your F1 visa the whole way through, or?
So luckily for me, I didn't have to take a gap year because Minnesota was able to continue sponsoring my F1 status. At the time, not long after, I heard there've been a lot of changes. Places who used to sponsor no longer sponsor. But at the time, the University of Minnesota sponsored my F1 status. The international students office there was phenomenal. I mean, and a lot of these places, it's just kind of like asking questions, calling. I guess people don't call anymore as much. But when I eventually got to the University of Minnesota Medical School, the international students was like my home office. They're just a place where I could go ask questions. And I remember the first year I went to talk to one of the ladies there that was kind of in charge of my file. She had said, about 5 years ago, we used to sponsor international students and kind of give them like a little stipend or something. But, because of like budget cuts, we're not doing it anymore. But, if it happens again, like, let me know. So it always boils down to just, coming out of your comfort zone and asking questions. I didn't so much ask her about that, but we were just talking about how I can, cut down on the expenses. As an international student, there's a lot of expenses financially. Medical, I didn't talk about this, but when I was in college, I quickly understood what it was to be an RA. You don't have to pay for housing. You don't have to pay for food. So I signed myself up for that. So when I got into...
What's an RA?
An RA is a resident assistant. So for those of us that grew up in in Africa, it's kind of like a prefect, like someone that's like in charge of, in the community halls where the students live in the school, you're in charge of like a floor of kids, like, you know, like giving them, telling them the rules, making sure they're in their rooms at the right time, things like that. But with that it's a job. It's not paid, but it's paid in the sense of you don't have to pay for housing and you don't have to pay for food. So that was a way that I was able to significantly cut my expenses by living on campus and doing that job, you know, going to meetings here and there. Obviously, something I ended up adding into my CV when I was applying to medical school. I did it for 3 years. So it kind of gave me that organizational experience and being able to talk about that as someone who's like who was able to, you know, cater for a group of people and kind of give direction and be orderly and things like that. So when I got into medical school, part of my goals was to focus in medical school, but also to kind of figure out a way to cut my expenses. So I think I had mentioned it to the international students lady, and she told me, oh, you know, a few years ago, they used to sponsor this scholarship where, in essence, they will kind of pay for your full tuition or half of tuition or percentage of it. And then I think by my 3rd or 4th year of medical school, I was having a conversation with her. I just happened to bring it back up, and they had restarted it. And I was able to get that for my last year of medical school. So I didn't pay tuition for the last year of medical school because International Students Office sponsored that. So there are not so many ways to financially help people when they're international, you know, in college or medical school. But there's some of these resources, you know, but you have to be open to search for them, and you have to be open to ask questions about them, because every little bit helps. But
a whole year of tuition assistance is pretty major, right?
It was huge. It was huge. And the lady, you know, and it was just kind of like, it's all about building a relationship. So I had that relationship with her for 4 years, kind of going to her office, you know, either I'm going to her office, kind of pay for something because, you know, you're still paying for things as an international student. But then I built that relationship with her. So when it came, and then obviously I was doing good at school. Right. So they didn't just give it to someone who wasn't, thriving in school. I was doing good in school. I was very active in a lot of communities and organizations. So they were able to give that to me at the time.
Yeah. And so how did you complete medical school? And then when it came to residency, were you applying into residency then as an OPT, or how did that work out for you?
So I think, and I have to try and remember. But yes, after every step, I did apply for OPT. I had OPT, like usually like the first year. I think that's what it was. Yeah. I would always have OPT the first year, and then the school will file for you. And then when they'll file for you to continue being in your F1 status. And so you're either going back to your home country, or some people go to Canada, depending on where your home country is, to get the paperwork. So yes, I lived in the embassy. Like every 2 years, we're all at the embassy, right? So I think that's what happened for medical school to kind of continue. I had OPT at one point, and then I flipped to continue with the F1 status. And then after medical school, it was about the same thing. But the thing about it is that if you can get into an American medical school, getting into residency is a different ballgame. It's so much easier, because I remember vividly getting into residency when anywhere I applied to, I got an interview, and people are trying to woo you to come to their institution. But then I became spoiled for choice, right? Because, for instance, I trained for medical school in Minnesota, and the Mayo Clinic is in Minnesota. So when I interviewed at the Mayo Clinic, which would everyone knows would be an excellent place to train, they weren't given the H-1B visa. They were only going to give the J-1 visa. And for me, because I could, from some people who had gone ahead of me, I could foresee what the difficulty would be, like how tough it would be for me personally on the J-1 visa. I decided to go to an institution that was going to file the H-1B, and which was Rush in Chicago. So that was how I ended up in Chicago for the time being for my residency.
So that makes perfect sense. As a person who had a J-1 myself, it's not an easy visa to have. It's very, very restrictive in a sense. And you end up doing things that you never thought you would have to do, and living in places that you maybe never imagined you would ever live.
Exactly.
So I can definitely understand the appeal to go to an institution that was going to support your H-1B during residency, because then that eliminated the whole, 2 or 3 years of underserved requirement, which is usually very tasking because you typically have to go somewhere that you really don't have any idea about.
Exactly.
So in general, there are going to be some people listening. I have a lot of listeners in Nigeria and in Cameroon and also India and some other countries, Mexico, lots of different places. And they'll be thinking, but what is the general process for a non-US person that wants to go to a US medical school? What are the things that they need to do? I'm really good at telling people what they need to do for the individual specialty applications. But when it comes to that question, it's a little bit hard, having not experienced it. Obviously, we know about the MCAT, but beyond that, what are the other components?
I think and this is a good question to ask because I recently was approached by someone that was asking me this exact question, like a young girl trying to get into medical school. And I would first of all say the caveat that things have changed. It's been over 10 years since I went through that whole process. Things have changed. But I think what will probably still remain similar is you have to do your research and find out, because I did a lot of research trying to figure out in the last less than 5 years, which institutions have taken any international student, even if it's just one. So a lot of the times when I was in med school, I was one of zero. I was like the only international student in my med school class. There were other Nigerians, but they were either green cards or citizens, but I was always the only international student. So you have to be, first of all, willing to do the research and look through all these schools to figure out which of them have taken international students. You have to talk to other people who are international students who have gone through any part of the process and ask, if they have friends or where did their friends go. But most importantly, you have to be kind of willing to go wherever, because like me, I ended up in Minnesota. It ended up being like a great experience. I met my husband there, everything was good, but I didn't know anything about Minnesota. But I wanted to go to med school. So that was where I ended up landing. The specifics about every little step I took, I can't remember, to be honest, what the process was in terms of all the paperwork and the application and all of that. I'm sure that we can look it up for what it's like right now. But there are definitely a lot of resources out there that will list all the different medical schools, provide you some of the places that have accepted international students in the last 3 years. Maybe not in the last 3 years, maybe in the last 4 years, you kind of have a whole set of a whole class and figure out where they've had international students. Even if it's one, even if it's two, that's kind of where it becomes a thing of numbers, because the more places you apply to, the more your chances of getting into somewhere. One other thing I would say, I think, even though I applied to so many places and only got one interview, my application was very different in the sense that I did the typical research. I think one summer I did research at a lab, but I also did a lot of very interesting things just because that's the kind of person I am. So for instance, I had gone to India. I volunteered through I signed up through one of my a club at my college. That was a traveling club. They would travel and volunteer all over the world, right? So we went to India, we went to Calcutta. I did that for 2 weeks. I found out that there was a Christian mission, medical mission group in Nigeria. They used to go maybe 2-3 times a year. And I was going home that summer. So I said, hey, why not? So I did a lot of researching on my own. I did a lot of things that either I'd never heard anyone do before, but I checked to make sure that it was safe. It checked out. It wasn't just a fluke of an organization. So I researched this Christian organization back in Nigeria. They went to a state in Nigeria that I'd never been to before, but it was close to where we lived. We did some medical mission, very simple things, just kind of you're doing the clerical part. You're working with real doctors, but you're doing the clerical part of it, signing patients in. So we're doing a lot of glaucoma surgeries on really, really rural parts of Nigeria. So that was an interesting thing because ultimately those are the things they're going to talk about when you interview, right?
Right.
And then they were like, oh, why do you have this economics why do you have this economics double major? What's that all about? So I kind of had to explain that. And you're also being honest because you're a human, right? Your human journey is interesting to them. At some point, I lived in New York, so I felt, I probably should experience what New York is really good for, which is a lot of marketing and advertising. So during part of my economics degree was you have to do a project. A lot of people were working then in like the JP Morgans and like the financial sector for summer. But I wanted to know what it was like to work in like public relations and advertising. So I worked at the Hearst Publications, which is like a publication that publishes like Cosmopolitan and the Oprah magazine and things like that. So I kind of learned how to be a PR person and like pitch stories to the radio and TV. And I worked on TV, things like that. So it was different. So I always tell people like at the time, I don't know if it's like that now, but everyone comes in with like a strong medical background, right? But what's going to set you apart is like the other extracurricular things you do. So like being an RA, this story I'm telling you, I also used to volunteer at like the local hospital, but you're not doing anything too clinical. What I did was a lot of helping move patients from place to place, being in the general environment of medicine and seeing if you're comfortable with it, the smells, the sounds, the sights, things like that. And being able to honestly talk about it. Because when I was going to med school, I only got one interview. But during that one interview, I had such a robust conversation with that lady, but that I'm sure she remembered me, and so that was how I was able to get on the wait list. So now I don't know exactly what the process is like, but ultimately it's all about being willing to go wherever, if that's your goal, to get into medicine, and starting to kind of create your list of all the places you would like to, that have accepted international students. And then also realizing that your story is one of one. So people may say, oh, this didn't work for them, but it doesn't mean it won't work for you. So just kind of going in with that mindset was what I've always had.
Yeah. And I think some things that everybody can learn from the story is being adventurous and being inquisitive to look things up for yourself, as opposed to you were probably doing this in a time where there was no Instagram. There were no blogs and people going ahead of you telling you exactly all the steps to take. There was no social media wasn't to the extent that it is now. You can literally type in a keyword. You can type in IMG, #IMG on Instagram, and all kinds of things will come up. Or medical student, or you can type in IMG roadmap and you get tons of resources to listen to. But this was a time where you literally were looking up things for yourself using the phone book and or the internet, but still very limited information.
Yeah, not the phone book though, Nina. Like not that far. Internet. A lot of internet searching. There's a lot of time in the library.
I use the phone book. So I remember when I used MapQuest to leave from Maryland to, I think, driving to Kentucky for residency. I used the MapQuest map. Wow. So anyhow, that was both socioeconomic issues and or the time. But I guess the point is there's a lot that we can gain right now as far as knowledge, information, resources at our fingertips, to where people need to be proactive. Like you all listening to be proactive. Instead of looking for somebody to tell you exactly everything to do, when you listen to stories like that story, maybe what you could do is say, hey, how does she think? How does she process life? Because people who are inquisitive, they ask questions. You went out there, you put yourself out there, you seek opportunities, you jump into new experiences. And I believe that's how you continue to expose yourself to new things, because you keep searching for something, as opposed to, hey, folding your arms and sitting at home and hoping and waiting that something will just fall from the sky when you're...
Definitely not.
Yeah. So I definitely encourage everyone to be a little bit adventurous, to be a little bit daring, to try new things, because you just never know what's going to open up doors for you. I'm sure when you were doing all these things, you weren't necessarily doing them for medical school application, but some of them were. Maybe volunteering at a hospital is applicable. But going to Calcutta, it could have been a volunteer experience, but those things make you more versatile. They make you more dynamic. And programs, whether it's residency or medical school programs, want to see people that have a different edge, who have something more to talk about than just, the plain cookie cutter. So
I think ultimately, then and now, there's still this push to kind of diversify medicine. So, and the push kind of comes down to the more you have people who have diverse experiences and backgrounds, they end up serving a diverse community, because the community is more apt to seek medical attention where they can see people that look like them.
Absolutely.
So, exactly. So you're different. What makes you different ultimately is going to be attractive to any program. You just kind of have to know how to sell it.
Right. And representation matters, right? Like you being in that position, having gone through these things also shows the next person coming behind you to say, hey, there's a potential out there for you. Obviously, we don't have the same story. See that it's possible because I've done it before you. So we're rounding up here. Quick questions that we have and we want to know is usually when we have any of our guests on, we like to ask them, what's their mantra for success? Like, what's their one thing? What's that? What do you attribute your tenacity, vigor, determination to?
I think you already kind of said it a little bit, but it's just kind of keep learning, kind of keep building on yourself, have a zeal for life. I've always kind of felt that way in anything I get involved in. It first of all has to be interesting or exciting for me or just something new. I want to always keep learning. And you don't always have to keep learning 100% medicine, but you can keep learning other things too about your environment, about other people. So for me, it's just kind of staying inquisitive and continuing to learn, because that way, if you're open to learn as you go, medicine is a given. You will keep learning that you're going to learn from your patients. You're going to learn from your peers. You're going to learn because new things happen. We're going through a pandemic, so everyone had to figure it out. We also had to learn through that. But I think for me right now in this stage of my life, I still want to learn from my colleagues or my friends. Like now I'm in a phase where I'm really trying to heighten up my financial literacy, because that's something that we never really learned in college, and our parents are not from here, so they're not here to teach us. So that, things like that. So I think my mantra, that what keeps me going, is just kind of being inquisitive and keep learning.
Yeah, it sounds you've done a great job with it so far, evidently. So if anyone's listening and they want to maybe reach out to you with a question or two, how can they get a hold of you?
Okay. So definitely they can. I know we haven't talked about this, but the way Nina and I know ourselves is through social media. I actually have a social media presence. It's called at ask_dr_ada, ask Dr. Ada. On Instagram, I have it also. I also have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, and building off of my Twitter page. But basically on my social, I try to educate young, what we call millennial parents who have young kids about ways to take care of their kids and different tips and tricks while raising my own kids, because I have 2 young kids as well. So I started that page, and that's kind of like what I've been working on and growing in the last few years as a kind of a side passion for myself. So you can always follow me there and see what I'm doing. You can always ask me questions. People ask me questions in the DM all day long. Or you could also check out my website. I do have a website. It's www.askdocada.com as well.
Okay. So we'll get all that information from you so we can put that in the show notes and the URL. So everybody listening, you can go ahead, just write down in the show notes and click on her links to be redirected to her pages. We'll put our YouTube, website, and social media links for Twitter, Instagram on there as well. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you and the work that you do. Thank you for being open and honest with us tonight and just giving us some inspiration and insight from your personal story. I believe that people learn a lot more from storytelling than really instructional lessons. Mm-hmm. And based on the feedback, usually stories like yours go a long way to encourage our IMGs that listen to us, and maybe anyone that falls on this in the future who is sort of in a similar position as you are, or as you were at one point in your life. So really appreciate you coming on and giving us some time of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dr. Loom. This has been great.
It was awesome. Look at you. I'm so proud of you for listening until the very end. And because of that, you deserve a reward. And I want you to go right now to drninaloom.com and download any of my free ebooks, whether it's for electives or clinical rotations, or even just whatever trials come your way as you navigate your IMG journey. Stay tuned for another episode coming up next.